II. John Hunt Morgan gave the people of this area their first significant alarm in the war. Today, Morgan stands higher than ever as one of the greatest Special Forces raiders in military history. Daniel Sutherland, a leading authority on guerrilla warfare in the Civil War, last year published the book Savage Conflict, the decisive role of guerrillas in the American Civil War. It was the first comprehensive study of guerrilla war in the entire Civil War. Sutherland wrote, and he's from the University of Arkansas, Morgan was a master of guerrilla tactics who stood alone as the premier Confederate partisan. Morgan inspired the Southern people, attracted recruits from several states, and encouraged the rise of local raiders throughout the South, Sutherland wrote. In honor of Kentucky's hosting the World Equestrian Games later this month, the Perryville Battlefield Museum has a new exhibit, The Horse Soldier, and Morgan is featured prominently. Museum curator Joni House said, "What's amazing to me is Europeans are nuts about the Civil War. It was a prime opportunity to showcase the cavalry, and certainly Kentucky horsemen are legendary. John Hunt Morgan and his escapades, and General John Buford, who held the high ground for the Union on the first day of Gettysburg." Morgan and his men were heroes, and they seemed larger than life. A reporter reminded his readers that Morgan was human, that he ate food and had to rest, and that his men were real flesh and blood. Morgan inspired the illusion of ubiquity, that he could be almost anywhere on any given night. Along the front in western Tennessee, Union guards imagined Morgan was lurking behind every grove of cedar trees. They thought they saw him riding along the mist on a rise in the distance. The hooting of owls and the movement of stray livestock in the underbrush would cause them to beat the long roll and form for battle. A rumor circulated that he was the phantom-like horseman who had been killing pickets in Pilot Knob, Missouri, where green recruits said they saw a mysterious night rider, a tall, heavy man with flowing beard, mounted on an immense black stallion, fleet as the wind. Shot after shot was fired at him, but he seemed to bear a charmed life. When he invaded Kentucky in the first Kentucky raid in July 1862, the Union commander, General Jeremiah T. Boyle in Louisville, panicked and ordered Cincinnati Mayor George Hatch to send artillery and troops to Lexington at once. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton telegrammed, "What means this sudden call from the mayor of Cincinnati?" Lincoln wired General Halleck in Mississippi, "They're having a stampede in Kentucky, please look to it." Many people in Boone County and other parts of Kentucky cheered for Morgan. Southern feeling was strong in Boone County. Do you know how many votes Lincoln got in Boone County in 1860? One, that's right. When the Civil War began, it was uncertain which side Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky would support. It was well known which side Boone County supported, but they didn't know about Campbell and Kenton or Hamilton County. The area had strong family and commercial ties with the South. Grant warned his father and mother that they should move from Covington back into the free state of Ohio, where they would be safe. The Cincinnati Enquirer was pro-Southern, and its editorials declared that the Union Army would never conquer the South and men were dying needlessly. The only answer was to remove troops from the South and allow slave owners to keep their slaves. But Union sentiment was strong in Covington and Newport, where many German and Irish Americans had settled in the 1840s and 1850s. Grant's father, Jesse, knew that he was entirely safe in Covington. The church he and his family belonged to was the Union Anti-Slave Methodist Church. Local Unionists feared Morgan's raiders and became convinced that they were heading in their direction. They feared that when Morgan arrived, local pro-Southerners might assist the raiders. Rumors circulated that rebels were meeting in their homes in Covington and singing Southern songs. Therefore, Union officials searched several homes and confiscated sheet music of Bonnie Blue Flag. Not supposed to be singing that song. Several Southerners were from Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties were arrested and imprisoned in Camp Chase in Columbus during the raid and throughout the summer. The fear was intense. On July 16, when Morgan was in Georgetown, the Cincinnati Gazette asked, Are the fortifications back of Covington and Newport properly manned? They were not. And that night at 11 p.m., a mounted courier from Independence raced into Covington with the false rumor that Morgan's entire force was south of Independence and on their way toward Covington. The church bells rang to call out the home guards. 2 days later, another false alarm sounded when Morgan was reported moving toward Covington. Another day's hard riding in this direction, declared the Cincinnati Commercial. There is no adequate force to detain them, and they are at our very doors. We must be fully prepared this day for any emergency. The next day, Saturday, July 19, tension overwhelmed Union officials in Covington. Morgan was no nearer and not come nearer. They declared martial law, posted guards on all roads into town, and warned that anyone on the streets after 9 p.m. would be shot. The excitement spread throughout the area, and in Petersburg that night, Lois A. Loader entered the typical sparse entry in his diary, "Morgan scared in Cincinnati." Morgan captured Cynthiana and departed in victory. "Glorious Colonel Morgan has dashed into Kentucky, whipped everything before him, and got off unharmed," wrote a Richmond clerk. "3 cheers for Morgan," said a Richmond headline. Southerners laughed that Morgan had frightened Cincinnati, referred to as Hogtown and Swinopolis, because of its pork industry. Morgan was an innovator in using the telegraph for intelligence, and he enjoyed using it to confuse and tease his Union opponents. On his way out of Kentucky in victory at the end of the raid, he could not resist teasing General Boyle, the Union commander who panicked in Louisville. He had his operator George Ellsworth send Boyle this message: "Good morning, Jerry. This telegraph is a great institution. You should destroy it as it keeps me too well posted." My friend Ellsworth has all your dispatches since the 10th of July on file. Do you want copies? Can you hear me in the back now? Okay. Morgan loved to tease Unionist editor of the Louisville Journal, George Prentice. When Morgan was captured and imprisoned in the Ohio State Penitentiary, Prentice said in his newspaper, "I hope John Morgan may live 5,000 years to serve 1 year in the penitentiary for each horse he has stolen." Morgan replied in his regimental newspaper, the Vedette, "At that rate, if Prentice could live 1 minute for every lie he has uttered, he would outlive Morgan." The greatest alarm, though, came 2 months after Morgan's raid, when the Confederate army of Braxton Bragg invaded Kentucky and totally defeated the defending Union army. There was no significant force to prevent the Confederates from coming up today's Dixie Highway and capturing Covington, Newport, and Cincinnati. "Are we threatened?" people asked. The Cincinnati Commercial replied, "Yes. Remember that your firesides, your wives, your little ones, your honor are in danger." Rumor held that Kentucky's Unionism had been a sham, that Kentuckians were rising en masse to join the invaders, and an army of 100,000 would soon be looting Covington. Fear and panic prevailed. In the crisis, Union General Lew Wallace was assigned to command the defense of the area. And when he received the order, one of his officers said, "There is nothing at Cincinnati with which to make a defense. To try must end in failure." Wallace answered, "Cincinnati has 200,000 inhabitants, and they ought to be able to defend themselves." He held a midnight meeting with the 3 mayors and declared law in Newport, Covington, and Cincinnati with their approval. He ordered every business closed, and under the watchword, "Citizens for labor, soldiers for battle," required every adult male to fight or work. Those who say fight, we will organize into companies and regiments. To the others, we will give spades and picks and set them digging on the hills in front of Covington and Newport. Think of the earth 10,000 men can move in 1 day. Then if the Confederates give us a week, we can get half of Indiana and half of Ohio behind the breastworks. To arms, exclaimed the Cincinnati Gazette. "The time for playing war has passed. Let us prepare to resist an army of 100,000 men bent on our destruction." General Wallace was born in Brookville, Indiana, close enough to NKU that we've had history majors from there. His father was governor of Indiana, and he grew up in Indianapolis. He was a lawyer in Crawfordsville, west of Indianapolis, when the war came, and he was familiar with Cincinnati and northern Kentucky. He sensed that the people of the area would rally for the Union. His answer to pro-Southerners was to order and to arrest anyone who refused to fight or work. The 8-mile defensive line had been surveyed at the beginning of the war by one of the best engineers in the Union Army, by later General Poe, who was General McClellan's chief of engineers. Fort Mitchell was partly constructed, and Battery Hooper and 7 other batteries, but a great deal of work was required. Wallace met with 3 building contractors and told them he needed a pontoon bridge across the Ohio between Cincinnati and Covington. The suspension bridge was under construction when the war began, and its unfinished pillars were standing in the water. Wallace showed them a drawing of a pontoon in an engineering textbook and asked if they'd ever seen one. No, they said. They talked for a few minutes, and they told Wallace they could build one in 48 hours. Astonished, he said, "Why, you can't build the boats in that time." "No," their spokesman answered, "but we will go up the Licking River and fetch coal barges, which will tie an anchor and make into a bridge." The bridge was finished in about 30 hours, and then they erected one across the Licking River. Cincinnati had 3,731 free African Americans in 1860, and they assumed the order included them and said everyone, every adult male. But the order was to enroll at your voting place, and they could not vote. When they asked a policeman how they could volunteer, he told them they were not included. But a few hours later, police began arresting every African-American adult male in town. Their homes were searched. They were seized at work in hotels and barbershops and on the levee. Without an opportunity to grab a hat or say goodbye, they were herded to a mule pen on Plum Street and brought over the river to work. General Wallace heard of this treatment and appointed Judge William Dixon to organize the men into the Black Brigade. Dixon said, since the services of the black men are required, let them be treated like men, not as if they're being driven from the city. Dixon took them back home to downtown Cincinnati, dismissed 400 of them, told them to report back as volunteers the next morning. Next morning, over 700 showed up at 5 a.m. and voluntarily enrolled as employees of the Army. This was nearly 3 weeks before Lincoln's preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, but in presenting their unit flag, Captain James Lupton said, "Men of the Black Brigade, rally around it. Assert your manhood. Be loyal to duty. Be obedient, hopeful, and patient. Slavery will soon die. Then there will be a land of the free. One country, one flag, one destiny." The Black Brigade worked for 3 weeks for the same pay as white laborers. And this was one of the first organized uses of African Americans for military purposes in the war. Under Wallace's leadership, the sense of panic and fear disappeared, and the community united in one of those superhuman responses that characterize Americans in crisis. Men drilled and dug rifle pits and cut the trees for a field of fire in a 2,000-yard swath for 8 miles from Ludlow to Fort Thomas. Some of the limbs that they cut and used as abattis to deter the attacking forces were honey locusts filled with thorns. Grocers donated canned peaches and fresh fruit. Women cooked meals, and the streetcar company gave free passage to boys and girls delivering food baskets. Men had fresh baked bread, meat, potatoes, and coffee. "Boys," said one of the squirrel hunters from Ohio, "this is better than we've been used to at home." Wallace said in the beginning that he'd be ready in 1 week.